Hey there, students. This is the second part of my lecture on the French Revolution. If you haven't seen part one, I suggest you go back and look at it. That's going to go into the old regime and the causes of the French Revolution. Now we're going to talk about the meeting of the Estates General in 1789, which gets the whole process of the French Revolution started. 1789 is a very important year. That's something that you want to make sure that you have memorized. That is the year that the Estates General meets, the year that the Bastille is stormed, the year that the French still observe as the beginning of the French Revolution. So 1789. Make sure you know that. So in 1789, the Estates General convenes, which was an advisory body for the king. They weren't a binding parliamentary body, but anytime you get a whole bunch of people together, powerful people, even in an absolute monarchy, it's going to cause some problems whether they have formal authority or not. So we're going to go into this disaster that is the meeting of the Estates General in 1789. Now, the first problem with the Estates General is that it was outdated. It hadn't met in 175 years. Keep in mind that if our Congress were going to be elected today, in terms of what it would have looked like 175 years ago, we would have been talking about only a group of old white guys, and a lot of them owning slaves and that sort of thing. A lot changes in 175 years. It would not be acceptable in the United States today to hold elections for Congress in the same way it had been done 175 years ago. So just like we've changed in 175 years, France had changed a great deal. Okay, now here is the way that the Estates General had met in the past, where you have three estates: first the clergy, second the nobility, and third everyone else, the other 97%. And each estate would cast one vote, and these votes were equal. So keep in mind that although the clergy and the nobility made up a very small amount of the population, they could get together, and if their votes were identical, then that cancels out the votes of everybody else. And you've got to take into account the rise of the bourgeoisie in France. Now, keep in mind, it's a French word. It's kind of hard to say. My history teacher, he said that when he first saw this word, he saw bourgeoisie, which that's kind of what it looks like. But bourgeoisie is going to be the French way to say it. Don't go around saying bourgeoisie because people are going to look at you funny. Now, who are these bourgeoisie, these bourgeoisie? Well, the bourgeoisie were the French professional class. These were the merchants, the lawyers, the manufacturers, the people who had money and contributed to commerce, but did not have titles of nobility and did not have the protections and exemptions given to the nobles and the church. So these are people who are doing the heavy lifting in the economy, but not getting any special privileges out of it. And these are the people that are bearing most of the tax burden, since the clergy and the nobility are exempt. So although the bourgeoisie are the economic producers, you see that an agreement between the clergy and the nobility equals victory, the way that the Estates General is constituted, the same way that it had been since the Middle Ages and had not been updated. And so 3% equals a majority. That's not very good math, is it? So Abbé Sieyès, who was a member of the clergy, and you can see by abbé, which is a word for abbot, someone who ran a monastery, he wrote a pamphlet called What is the Third Estate? And this is great to remember for an essay or something like that, an FRQ if you're in AP Euro. He asked at the beginning, what is the third estate? Everything. What has it been until now in the political order? Nothing. What does it seek to become? Something. So essentially what Abbé Sieyès is saying, that look, the third estate is the lifeblood of this country. That these are the producers, these are the farmers, the manufacturers, the lawyers, the merchants. They drive the economy. The church and the nobility just kind of sit there and do their thing. Keep in mind that the bourgeoisie also made up a lot of the civil service, a lot of the government workers. So what is the third estate in terms of the economy and production and contributing to the well-being of the country? Everything. But the problem is that until now, it has been nothing in the political order, that the third estate does not have the privileges that the first and second estate have. So what do we want? To become something. Now, this is perfectly reasonable. We're not asking really to become everything in France. We acknowledge that the clergy and the nobility have historical privileges, but just give us something and we'll be okay. So keep in mind that the demands of the third estate right here at first in what is a more liberal or moderate phase of the revolution are not radical. These people are not calling for heads to be cut off or anything like that. They just want some changes in the political order, creating kind of like a constitutional monarchy like Britain had at the time. And so they propose a couple of reforms. The first reform they propose is doubling the third, that the third estate can have twice as many delegates as the other estate. Now, keep in mind, the third estate makes up about 97% of the population. They're not asking for 97% of the delegates. They're just asking for half. You know, we make up 97% of the country, but all we want is to become something. Now, the second reform goes hand in hand with this. The second proposed reform is to vote by head. And what this means, instead of each estate tallying its votes and casting a vote as a group, we want all of the delegates to vote individually. Now, the goal here is that if you can vote by head, that some of the more progressive nobles and some of the parish priests among the clergy, keep in mind that a lot of the delegates from the clergy were from the third estate originally before they became members of the clergy. It's the bishops mainly who had been nobles before that. So they believe that if you can vote by head, that some of the nobles and some of the clergy would vote with the third estate, which could achieve a majority on some of the reforms that they wanted. Keep in mind, in order for this to work, both of these have to happen. You can't just have the third estate with twice as many delegates with the same sort of vote that they'd had previously. That destroys the point. Louis is indecisive. Louis XVI, keep in mind, is not Louis XIV. He is not the decisive individual that his predecessor was. So Louis decides, you know what? I'll double the third. I'll let him have twice as many delegates, but we're going to vote the old way. They're not going to have any more say than they would have. So what Louis is really saying is, I'm consenting to having twice as many ticked off people showing up to the Estates General. So the Estates General convenes in May of 1789, and immediately things get a bit awkward. The hat fiasco. All right, so what happens is everybody comes in the room. France at the time had sumptuary laws. These are laws that governed what people of different social classes could and couldn't do, could and couldn't wear, could and couldn't eat. There were even laws about how many courses of food could be served at somebody's table based on their social rank. So what happens here is that Louis sits down and he takes his hat off. Well, the clergy take their hats off because they're a privileged class. Then the nobility take their hats off. Then the third estate, which has no privileges, but sees that the king's taken his hat off, the clergy's taken their hat off, the nobles have taken their hat off. The third estate decides, after an uncomfortable pause, some of them start taking their hats off. And before you know it, everybody has their hat off. Now, after another uncomfortable pause, Louis's like, "Oh, I know you didn't." And he puts his hat back on, okay? So rather than see these commoners, these bourgeoisie, these non-noble, non-clergy types declaring themselves equal and not wearing hats, Louis decides he's going to put his hat back on. I'll show them. And so everybody's going to keep their hat on. So once again, Louis has been the king of awkward, so to speak. So this hat fiasco has the thing starting off on a bad note on the first day.
"Oh, I know you didn't."
And so what ends up happening is the Estates General pretty much collapses, and the Third Estate is so ticked off, they decide, we're not even going to be a part of this mess anymore, and they go off and form what they declare themselves to be the National Assembly. Now, keep in mind, this is without the king's permission.
"Oh, I know you didn't."
They just say, we're the National Assembly. We represent the nation of France. And so we're no longer the Third Estate. We don't have a label. We don't have a number. And you know what, clergy and nobility? We would like for you to join us.